In a small, tranquil village nestled between dense forests and open plains, a young man named Kofi tended to his days with a quiet routine. Unlike the more boisterous villagers who filled the market square with laughter and chatter, Kofi moved through life with an unassuming calmness. Known for his gentle, thoughtful nature, he was someone who seemed to carry the weight of a secret within him, a quiet strength rooted deep within, yet veiled behind his calm exterior. Kofi's days began early, long before the sun peeked over the distant horizon. He would sit by the river that wound along the edge of the village, its waters shimmering under the faint light of dawn. He'd watch the gentle currents glide past smooth stones and whispering reeds, their rhythm as steady and unhurried as his own heartbeat. The river was a place of solace, a silent companion to his thoughts and memories. His family had lived beside this river for generations, honoring it as a source of both life and mystery. Elders of the village spoke in hushed voices about spirits dwelling within its depths, kind but watchful forces who guarded the waters and listened to the quiet prayers of those who came to seek guidance. Kofi had never seen these spirits himself, but he respected the river as his ancestors did, often finding himself gazing into its depths, as if it held answers he had yet to discover. Life in the village had a simple, unhurried rhythm. Kofi worked as a fisherman, a role passed down from his father, whose strength and skill were still the talk of village stories. While Kofi held deep respect for his father's legacy, he felt a pang of inadequacy in his own abilities. Fishing, for him, wasn't just a task, it was an intimate dance with nature, each cast of his net an attempt to connect, to reach beyond the surface into something he felt but couldn't quite understand. The weight of this longing, combined with his love for the river, seemed to tether him to a yearning that felt both profound and unreachable. In the evenings, Kofi would return home to his mother's warm embrace and his younger siblings' laughter, the sound filling their small house with a joy he cherished. But within him, there lingered a quiet sadness, a sense of being out of place in a world where everyone else seemed content. Though he loved his family dearly, there was an invisible line that set him apart, a deep-rooted restlessness that even he couldn't explain. In moments of solitude, he'd wonder if he was destined for something beyond the simple life he led. The villagers regarded him with a mixture of respect and gentle curiosity. Some saw him as introspective, perhaps too thoughtful for someone so young. Others believed his quiet ways were a sign of wisdom, a gift from the spirits of the river. Children watched him with awe, listening intently to his soft-spoken tales of the river and its secrets, stories he spun from the depths of his imagination. But deep down, Kofi knew these stories were more than mere tales. They were fragments of something he felt within himself, whispers from a part of his soul connected to the unseen mysteries of the world. There were days when Kofi found himself lost in thought, staring out across the river as if its gentle flow could guide him toward answers he didn't yet have. He wondered what lay beyond the village, beyond the plains and the distant mountains that met the sky. Yet he couldn't bring himself to venture too far, bound by a sense of duty to his family and a fear of the unknown. His heart held dreams and questions, but he hadn't yet gathered the courage to chase them, content instead to let the river's soft murmur lull him into temporary peace. The river, with its endless depths, became a mirror for Kofi's soul. He saw his own uncertainties reflected in its shifting currents, its quiet mysteries comforting him in a way words couldn't. It was as if the spirits of the river understood his longings, each ripple whispering secrets only he could hear. As dawn turned to dusk, Kofi sat beside the water, feeling its timeless pull, and wondered if one day, it might reveal the answers he sought. The days slipped by with this quiet rhythm, Kofi's heart filled with a mixture of longing, peace, and anticipation. He couldn't shake the feeling that something awaited him just below the surface, a quiet truth waiting to emerge, like the fish that rose from the river's depths. The seasons passed in steady rhythm, and Kofi's life remained tethered to the river. Yet, as he grew older, a sense of unease began to stir within him, a restlessness he couldn't quite place. The more he watched the river, the stronger the pull became, as if its silent currents held secrets he was meant to uncover. This quiet yearning, once a gentle whisper, now felt like a rising tide. Still, Kofi hesitated, unsure what it was that gnawed at him, only that it had taken root and wouldn't let go. As his sense of longing grew, so too did the expectations placed upon him. His family depended on him, not just as a fisherman but as a steady presence, someone they could rely on. His mother, wise and practical, often reminded him of his responsibilities. She'd look at him with a knowing gaze, her voice soft yet firm. "You're the eldest, Kofi. Your brothers and sisters look up to you. They need to know there's strength in this family." Kofi would nod, feeling the weight of her words settle heavily in his heart. He understood the importance of his role, yet he felt trapped, bound to a life that seemed to grow narrower each day. To compound his internal turmoil, his relationship with his father's memory cast a long shadow over him. Though his father had passed away when Kofi was a child, the stories of his skill and strength were woven into the fabric of the village's history. People would often recall tales of how his father's hands could cast a net with such precision that the fish practically leaped into it, as though drawn to his energy. Kofi admired these stories, but they also fed his insecurities. He knew he was not his father. His hands, though skilled, held a gentler touch, a quieter intention. He often wondered if he was enough, if his presence could fill the void his father had left. One afternoon, Kofi's internal struggle took an unexpected turn. While out on the river with his nets, he caught sight of a figure standing on the opposite bank. It was his cousin Alma, a spirited young woman known for her independence and fierce will. Alma was only a few years older, and she had always been a source of mystery and fascination for Kofi. Unlike him, she had a boldness about her, a willingness to speak her mind and pursue whatever path she desired. They had been close as children, often playing by the river and sharing secrets beneath the shade of the trees. Alma's gaze caught his, and she beckoned him over. When he approached, she wasted no time in voicing her thoughts. "Kofi, you've grown quiet. What happened to the boy who used to dream by the river? Do you ever think about life beyond these shores?" Her words struck a chord. Kofi had long admired Alma's courage, her ability to live authentically, unburdened by the expectations of others. Yet hearing her question aloud forced him to confront his own doubts. He hesitated, unsure how to answer, but Alma continued, her tone gentle but insistent. "There's more to you, Kofi, than this village. You feel it, don't you? The river, it's calling you, too." Kofi felt a surge of emotions, relief that someone had recognized his internal conflict, mixed with a creeping fear of what her words might imply. He wanted to tell her about the nights he spent by the river, the whispers he thought he'd heard, the strange pull he felt deep in his heart. But as he opened his mouth to speak, his words faltered. How could he explain something he didn't even understand himself? Alma sensed his hesitation and placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "You don't have to say anything, Kofi. Just remember that it's okay to seek your own path. You don't owe anyone an explanation." As the days turned into weeks, Kofi's conversations with Alma weighed heavily on him. He found himself avoiding the river, as if distancing himself from it could quiet the questions rising within. But each morning, as the village woke to the sound of roosters crowing and children laughing, Kofi's gaze would drift toward the water. The river seemed to call to him even louder, its currents murmuring words he couldn't ignore. His internal struggle began affecting his work as well. Fishing, once a task that had brought him peace, now felt burdened by his restlessness. He would spend hours on the river, his mind drifting, his hands clumsily casting his nets. His younger brothers noticed his distraction, sometimes teasing him for being so lost in thought, but Kofi merely forced a smile, his heart heavy. One evening, as he walked home after an unsuccessful day on the water, his mother confronted him. Her eyes were filled with worry, her voice carrying an uncharacteristic edge. "Kofi, you've been distant. The village depends on you. Your family depends on you. Why are you letting us down?" Her words struck a nerve, and for a brief moment, Kofi felt a surge of resentment rise within him. He loved his family dearly, but he couldn't ignore the feeling that they couldn't see him for who he truly was, that they only saw him as his father's son, as a provider, as the boy who would keep their family grounded. The pressure of these unspoken expectations weighed on him, leaving him feeling unseen, his true self hidden beneath layers of duty. In his heart, Kofi knew he was at a crossroads, yet he didn't know how to break free from the role he had grown into. He wanted to honor his family's legacy, to carry his father's name with pride, but he also felt an undeniable urge to explore something beyond the life he had been born into. The river, with its silent depths, seemed to hold the answers he sought, but he couldn't bring himself to venture into its mysteries, not yet. In the quiet of the night, as the village slept and only the soft chirping of crickets filled the air, Kofi found himself once again by the river's edge. He looked out over the moonlit waters, feeling the weight of his doubts and dreams mingling together. His mind wandered back to Alma's words, her encouragement to seek his own path. For the first time, he allowed himself to wonder, was he meant for something more? In that moment, Kofi realized that his conflict wasn't merely with the expectations of his family or the memory of his father. It was with himself, with the parts of his heart that yearned for freedom, understanding, and perhaps, an encounter with the spirits of the river. This slow, simmering tension had yet to reach its resolution, but Kofi could feel that he was on the brink of something profound. The river called to him, and though fear lingered, curiosity was beginning to take root. The river flowed as it always had, steady and unyielding, yet now Kofi saw it with new eyes, as if the waters held reflections of a past he hadn't fully understood. His nightly walks by the riverbank had become a ritual, a quiet space to wrestle with his thoughts. His memories of childhood often surfaced during these walks, fragments of laughter, glimpses of his father, and images of himself as a carefree child, running through the village without the weight he now bore. One evening, Kofi found himself drawn back to an old grove by the river's edge, a place he hadn't visited in years. The grove was dense, shaded by large trees whose roots reached into the water like twisted fingers. It was there that he remembered one of his last clear memories with his father, a memory he hadn't allowed himself to revisit in years. He was a boy, perhaps 6 or 7, standing at the water's edge while his father, strong and calm, cast his nets into the river. "Do you know the secret of the river, Kofi?" his father had asked, his voice a deep rumble that Kofi had always found comforting. At the time, he had thought it was just a game, something his father said to entertain him. "What secret, Baba?" he'd asked, his young eyes wide with wonder. His father had smiled, a quiet, knowing smile, and gestured toward the water. "The river speaks, Kofi. It has a life, a spirit, just like us. If you listen, really listen, it will tell you things." Kofi had laughed, enchanted by his father's words, but he hadn't truly understood them. The memory was like a ghost, haunting him with a sense of something left unresolved, something important that he had lost when his father passed. This memory now returned to Kofi with a newfound clarity, and with it came an unexpected ache, a yearning to reconnect with his father's legacy. He realized that this wasn't the first time he'd felt the river's pull. As a child, he had sensed it but had never known what to make of it. His father had tried to teach him, tried to pass down an understanding of the river's spirit, but his father's death had left those lessons unfinished. The following morning, Kofi couldn't shake the memory. He went to his mother, hoping that she might shed light on his father's strange beliefs about the river. Sitting beside her, Kofi asked, "Mother, did father ever speak to you about the river's spirit?" His mother looked at him with a mixture of surprise and something that looked like fear. For a moment, she hesitated, her hands pausing in their work. "Your father was a man of many beliefs, Kofi," she said quietly, choosing her words carefully. "He thought the river was more than water, that it had a soul. I never fully understood it myself, but he said the river had protected our family for generations." Kofi's curiosity deepened. "Why didn't he teach me more about it? Why did he only tell me those stories as a child?" She sighed, her gaze drifting to a distant place. "Because, Kofi, those beliefs came with burdens. Your father didn't want you to carry that weight too young. He said that if the river ever truly called to you, you would find your own way to it. But I think he feared that you would be drawn to the river like he was, and perhaps lose yourself in its mysteries." The words lingered in Kofi's mind. His father's connection to the river had not been as simple as he'd imagined. It was not just a ritual or a story, it was something more profound, almost sacred. And now, Kofi realized that his own pull toward the river might not be a mere coincidence. It was as if his father had passed down this connection like a quiet legacy, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. Days turned into weeks, and Kofi's restlessness grew alongside this understanding of his father's beliefs. One evening, while fishing, he found himself drifting into memories of his father's last days. It had been a difficult time for the family. His father had grown ill, and with each passing day, his once strong frame had weakened. Yet, despite his failing health, he would insist on sitting by the river, sometimes whispering to it, as if sharing secrets only it could understand. Kofi remembered sitting beside him during those final days, watching as his father's eyes glazed over with an intensity that frightened him. His father had taken his hand one evening and spoken in a voice that was barely a whisper, yet it had stayed with Kofi ever since. "Kofi," he'd said, "the river is more than it seems. Promise me, one day, you'll listen." At the time, Kofi hadn't understood. He had thought his father's illness had clouded his mind, that these were simply the ramblings of a sick man. But now, as he remembered his father's words, he felt a shiver run through him. He had promised to listen, and perhaps it was that promise that had led him here, to this moment. Driven by an urge to uncover the truth, Kofi sought out Alma, his cousin who had encouraged him to question his life by the river. He shared with her the memories that had resurfaced, the strange stories his father had told him, and the sense that his father's legacy had left an invisible mark on him. Alma listened intently, her face serious as she took in his words. She told him of stories she'd heard from the elders, tales of men who had felt the river's call, who had followed its path and come to understand its spirit. She warned him, though, that such knowledge came at a price. "Kofi, if you go down this path, there's no turning back," she said, her eyes filled with concern. "You may learn things you wish you hadn't. Are you ready for that?" Kofi didn't know how to answer, but he felt an undeniable pull, a need to honor his father's memory and discover the river's secrets. He spent the following days in quiet reflection, preparing himself for whatever lay ahead. He would sit by the river's edge, watching its steady flow, listening to its soft murmurs, as if waiting for it to reveal something, anything, that could guide him. One night, as he sat in his usual spot, Kofi had a vision, a fleeting image that flickered across his mind like a distant memory. He saw his father, younger and stronger, standing in the river's shallows, his hands outstretched as if in communion with the water. The vision filled him with a strange warmth, a sense of peace, yet it also left him with more questions. He realized that this was not just a story of his father's past, it was a story he was now a part of, a legacy that ran through his veins as surely as the river itself. In the silence of that moment, Kofi felt a profound shift within him. He no longer saw the river as a mere body of water, it was a living force, one that held memories, secrets, and the spirit of his father. His past, his father's beliefs, and the river's silent call were now intertwined, and Kofi understood that he could not ignore them any longer. He knew that the answers he sought would not come easily, that the river's secrets were not given freely. But he was ready, or as ready as he could be, to follow the path his father had hinted at, to listen to the river and perhaps, one day, to understand the mysteries it held. Kofi stood at the riverbank, his mind quiet but his heart beating with a resonance that matched the flow of the water before him. Tonight was different, he sensed it deeply. This time, he hadn't come to the river to find answers or to make sense of his father's words. He had come simply to be with the river, to let it reveal what it would if it chose. In the silence, memories of his father surged forward with vivid clarity, his father's steady hand on his shoulder, his quiet laugh, the strength in his eyes. All the mysteries, the fragments, and the strange pull he had felt for so long began to coalesce into a single truth that washed over him like a wave. For the first time, he understood that his father's legacy was not a puzzle to be solved but a feeling to be embraced. The river wasn't merely a symbol of wisdom or mystery, it was a source of love, connection, and strength, a grounding force in their lives. His father had never intended for him to dissect its meaning. Instead, he wanted Kofi to feel what he felt, to trust in its power to guide him in life. Kofi's eyes filled with tears, not from sorrow, but from a profound release. He whispered to the river, his voice barely audible in the quiet night air, "Baba, I understand now." In that instant, he felt as though his father were there with him, smiling with that familiar warmth and pride, as if they had reached an unspoken understanding across time and memory. As the river continued its steady flow, Kofi's heart felt lighter, filled with a peace he had never known. The burdens he had carried, the doubts, the struggles to understand his place, his heritage, and his family's legacy, seemed to fade. He realized that his father's message had always been simple: trust the river as you trust yourself. He sat by the bank, letting the night surround him, feeling deeply connected not only to his father but to his own inner strength and intuition. The river was now a part of him, a quiet, steady current that would guide him in his own life. It was no longer a mystery but a memory, a symbol of love, resilience, and unity. When Kofi finally rose to leave, he looked back at the water, a smile forming as he whispered his final promise, "I will listen." With a newfound sense of peace and purpose, he walked away from the river, knowing he would carry its spirit within him, forever enriched by the wisdom his father had left for him, not in words, but in the silence of a shared understanding. In the weeks that followed his night by the river, Kofi began to see his world with a gentler, more open heart. Each morning, he rose with the sun and went about his daily tasks in the village, helping his mother weave baskets, fishing with his younger cousins, or tending to the plants he had so carefully cultivated near the riverbank. But these tasks felt different now, holding a depth and meaning he had never noticed before. The memories of his father, the words left unsaid, and the connection he had found within himself all merged into a quiet sense of purpose. People in the village began to notice changes in Kofi. He was calmer, his actions more intentional, his presence steady. His friends would often see him walking to the river alone, not as someone searching for answers but as one simply being, absorbing the lessons that came from listening to the world around him. Children, once playful and rowdy, felt an almost instinctual calm in his presence, gravitating toward him to hear his gentle words or stories of his father's wisdom. They listened closely, sensing that these stories held something precious, something deeper than simple tales. One evening, as the village gathered around a small fire, one of the elders, Adwoa, approached Kofi. "You've changed, my son," she said, her eyes twinkling with kindness. "Your spirit feels grounded, as if you've found something many of us search for all our lives." Kofi nodded thoughtfully, realizing that words alone could not convey the transformation he had experienced. "It's the river," he murmured, more to himself than to her. "It teaches us things without speaking, just like Baba used to." Adwoa chuckled softly, understanding his sentiment well. "Yes, the river holds many stories. It knows when to be gentle, when to be fierce, and how to move without needing to explain its course. Those who listen to it, like you, Kofi, find that it speaks to the heart, not the ears." In that moment, Kofi felt the weight of his father's legacy in a way that was no longer burdensome but enriching. His father's life, filled with quiet integrity and wisdom, had always been about nurturing these same qualities in others, guiding them not with words but through example. His father's legacy wasn't tied to tales of greatness or renown but to the simple, enduring qualities that shape a life well lived: patience, compassion, and an unwavering trust in oneself. From that day forward, Kofi became known not for his ambitions or accomplishments, but for his quiet strength, much like his father. People sought him out, whether for comfort or advice, finding solace in his presence. To Kofi, however, the greatest comfort was the bond he felt with his father, who had left him a gift that could never be measured or taken away, a connection to his own soul. One evening, a young boy from the village approached Kofi at the riverbank, looking curious and a little troubled. "Why do you come here every day, Kofi?" he asked, eyes wide with innocent wonder. Kofi smiled, watching the boy for a moment before answering. "The river has many stories, Kwaku. Some of them are about our lives, our families. Others are about things we can't even see. But they are all worth listening to." The boy frowned, not fully understanding. "But I don't hear anything," he whispered, disappointed. Kofi chuckled softly, kneeling down beside him. "You will, one day. Sometimes we don't hear with our ears, but with our hearts. And that takes time, Kwaku. You have to be patient." The boy nodded thoughtfully, as though filing the words away for another time. Kofi placed a gentle hand on his shoulder, feeling a quiet joy in passing on what he had come to know. He realized that this was how his father's wisdom would continue, not through a grand story or heroic tale, but through these small moments, gently imparted, felt in the heart rather than spoken aloud. Over time, the river became a symbol in the village, known for its quiet strength, its ability to flow endlessly without force. And so did Kofi. People would watch him walk along its banks, often with children following, some taking in his words and others simply enjoying his quiet presence. He was content knowing that, like his father, his legacy was not bound to fame or fortune but to a life rooted in trust and humility. In those quiet moments, he understood what his father had always known, that peace doesn't come from answering every question but from finding comfort in the mystery itself. It's in the silent spaces where the heart learns to listen, where the spirit grows. One evening, as the sun set over the horizon and bathed the river in golden light, Kofi sat once more by the water's edge, feeling the world around him with a sense of fulfillment he had never thought possible. With a soft smile, he whispered to the river, "Thank you. As he rose to leave, he knew that the river, like his father, would always be with him, guiding him gently, showing him that sometimes the greatest wisdom is found not in what we seek to understand but in what we allow ourselves to simply feel. As the story concludes, I invite you to take a moment to reflect on the wisdom of the river. If this journey touched your heart or sparked a new thought, consider sharing what resonated most with you in the comments. I'd love to hear your reflections on Kofi's quiet path to understanding. And, if you'd like to experience more stories like this, remember to like this video and subscribe for future narratives that explore the quiet strength within us all. Thank you for joining me on this gentle journey. Until next time.